Welcome to our presentation on educational leadership. Through this interactive forum, we will detail gender issues that have led to the underrepresentation of female teachers in leadership positions. Berkman stated that while the glass ceiling has been broken in regards to access to educational leadership, females in administration still face gender-related prejudices and challenges in daily practice. We hope that you enjoy our journey together as we explore this deeply historical yet wholly relevant topic. To begin, this presentation will explore four key areas: the historical implications in both Canada and the United States that has led to the underrepresentation of female educational leaders. We'll analyze the barriers that have historically and continue to affect women's access to leadership roles. It is imperative that we not only examine the past, but also our current state. We will present the current statistics to consider how far we have progressed over the past century. Finally, we consider the future and what initiatives must be in place to enhance and maintain female representation. Let us analyze key terminology to ensure that we are comfortable with the terms that drive this topic. As our presentation focuses on leadership, it is a key term to define. Leadership refers to the process of influencing other people's activities in the organization towards goal setting and goal achievement. Institution. An institution is a large-scale and established set of laws, practices, and organizations that govern the political or social life of a people. Although we focus predominantly on the educational institution, it is important to note that all institutions have influenced the oppression of women in leadership positions. Oppression is defined as the discrimination of one social group, in our case men, against another, backed by institutional power. Patriarchy is the belief in the inherent superiority of men and the organization of society based on this belief. Last but equally significant is gender. The World Health Organization defines gender as socially constructed characteristics of females and males, such as norms, roles, and relationships. Let us now head into the past. Brynja argued that education has traditionally been a feminine job, similar to a mother role or caregiver. The charge of young children was deemed a woman's task. Women were deemed incapable of teaching older children or governing schools. In Canada, in the early 20th century, the teaching profession liberated young women from traditional domestic roles. However, this liberation was highly restrictive in nature. Young argued that women in these teaching positions were powerless and at the mercy of school trustees and provincial inspectors, all of whom were men. The hegemony of the male provincial inspectorate continued unquestioned until the 1960s. For decades, men were deemed the authoritative leaders and women the subservient carers. Before exploring the 1960s, let us analyze America's state of education at a comparable time in history. Similar to the situation in Canada, school administration in the United States was a male-dominated domain. Bluent argued that the early decades of the 20th century brought forth a challenge to this gender-restricted work. As men were whisked off to battle in both the First and Second World Wars, women were tasked with filling educational leadership positions, including superintendency. From 1919 to 1950, also coined the Golden Age of female school administrators, women in the United States filled a whopping 25% of the superintendent positions. To compare the statistic to a current-day reality, a study conducted by the School Superintendents Association of America revealed that women held only 27% of the superintendent positions in 2015. This golden age came to an abrupt halt at the conclusion of World War II. Bluent shared that schools launched aggressive campaigns to recruit men to the educational setting. The war had brought home millions of veterans in search of civil employment. Men entering the schools as educators were promised that they would quickly advance to school administrative roles. Post-World War II also redefined the role of principal. There was a push to professionalize the position. Educators were now expected to complete university credit at the graduate level. Bluent identified key barriers for women. Many of these university programs did not admit women, and veterans were prioritized to fill the limited slots in these programs. The war also brought forth the hypermasculinization of the role of principal. The 1950s was a time when homosexuality was a grave concern in the educational field. Bluent stated that this exaggerated concern about the masculinity of school administrators drove conventional gender-identified roles in schooling to extreme poles. Gendered stereotypes reached an all-time high.
Gendered stereotypes have pervaded the educational domain for decades. Sensoy and D'Angelo argued that the relentless repetition of gendered ideas in the mainstream makes them seem true, without us being particularly educated on the issues. These stereotypes include, but are not limited to, women are not sufficiently qualified to lead, there are a shortage of qualified female candidates, women are not committed to upward mobility, men are simply better principals, women do not aspire to lead, and men's personalities are better suited for administrative roles. In the late 1960s and 1970s, there came a dramatic shift in the educational domain led by the Canadian women's movement. In the 1960s, there was mounting frustration among women in the educational domain. Men continued to be prioritized for virtually all administrative positions. Men were deemed the logical choice, and this logic, Young explains, was reinforced and supported by Canadian policies that required married and later pregnant women to resign from leadership roles. The home was expected to be a woman's first and foremost responsibility. Gaskell explained that the 1970s brought forth concerted attempts to change the public school system. The barriers to higher education were lowered, women were able to more freely enter graduate programs that allowed them to satisfy administrative job requirements. The Royal Commission on the Status of Women, released in 1970, stated that changes in education could bring dramatic improvements in the social and economic position of women in an astonishingly short time. This report, Coulter argued, brought forth attention to sex role stereotyping, which would become an integral part of the global feminist agenda. Coulter and Sensoy and D'Angelo highlighted the importance of language. Individuals may have an intimate understanding of social inequality, but they may not have the academic language to discuss it in a scholarly setting. The language in the report and the focus on gendered roles made way for feminist research and the introduction of women's studies programs. In the decades that followed the 1970s, there was an increased acknowledgement that students, especially young girls, needed to see women in positions of leadership. Gaskell argued that women's movement targeted the educational domain because education has the power to affect and infiltrate all domains and all age groups. Questioning the power relations in our educational institutions was met with resistance. Women were attempting to dismantle a solidly built institution. The introduction of female leaders threatened to strip men of their long-held positions of power. The visibility of women in power continued to gain momentum as we entered the 1980s and 1990s. From 1988 to 1998, the percentage of female school principals in American schools jumped significantly from 20% to 48%. This growth was dramatic and positive for the educational domain. Rees, as cited in Coulter, stated that by 1990, 8 provincial ministries of education and school boards in 6 provinces had some form of equal opportunity, affirmative action, or employment equity policy. Despite these positive initiatives, the 1990s were a time of uncertainty. The economic instability of the time caused political activity to focus on job security, poverty, and social security. Education, unfortunately, argued Coulter, was pushed far down on the agenda. Teachers at this time faced an uphill battle to continue to advocate for the policy changes that aided women in their attainment of leadership power. Barriers continued to plague women in their quest for career advancement.
Women who have sought and continue to seek positions in educational leadership face many barriers. Sperandio divides these barriers into 2 categories: external beliefs, such as others' beliefs, language, and actions, and internal barriers, such as personal beliefs about ability and contributions. These barriers may seem less apparent today than before, with the increased number of female administrative leaders. However, it is important to note that barriers are indeed still in place and have a profound effect on women's professional lives. Haldebrand and Riet argue that women lack female role models and mentors in educational administration. This argument will be explored further in the upcoming Future Considerations component. Acceptance and respect from male and female colleagues can be a barrier for women in an administrative position. In Asia Kalsoum Qureshi and Hassan's study on perceived gender differences in educational leadership, all respondents maintained that male leaders are more committed towards empowering their employees. One respondent argued that the guidance of male leaders is taken more seriously than a woman's. A second respondent argued that women's decisions are often questioned and women leaders are never really given complete power. Bruner and Kim stated that the perceptions by school board members and the public that women leaders lacked fiscal ability and organizational management skills continue to perpetuate a belief that women are ill-suited for leadership. These stereotypes affect the acceptance and level of respect that one holds for female leaders. A third barrier is the perceived notion that women must be better qualified than their male counterparts, argue Hildebrand and Riet. There is pressure on women to be extraordinary. Berkman argues that female leaders often have unrealistic expectations placed upon them. They are expected to portray the stereotypically female qualities, such as compassion and effective communication, the more maternal sides. Yet they are also expected to assume the masculine qualities of objectivity, authority, and decisiveness. Saujani describes how men and women differ when it comes to applying for jobs, and the perfection-like standard that women have been socialized to accept.
And in 5th grade, an HP report found that men will apply for a job if they meet only 60% of the qualifications. But women? Women will apply only if they meet 100% of the qualifications. 100%. This study is usually invoked as evidence that, well, women need a little more confidence. But I think it's evidence that women have been socialized to aspire to perfection and they're overly cautious. And even when we're ambitious, even when we're leaning in, that socialization of perfection has caused us to take less risks in our careers. And so those 600,000 jobs that are open right now in computing and tech, women are being left behind. And it means our economy is being left behind on all the innovation and problems women would solve if they were socialized to be brave instead of socialized to be perfect.
Sperandio argues that balancing professional and family commitments is a significant barrier to women's career development. Young states that women have tended to enter the role of principal later in their careers, calling female leaders late bloomers. Women's careers have traditionally been characterized by interruptions for family leaves, which can delay or slow the hierarchical progression. Sperandio also argued that the majority of women in her study were reluctant to apply for leadership positions that required them to be an hour's drive from home. Balancing career and family is a constant juggling act at the forefront of parents' minds. Let us now analyze statistics on our current gender divide in the classroom. Statistics Canada reveals that of the 756,900 teachers and professors in Canada, 32% are men and 68% are women. The gender divide becomes more apparent as we analyze elementary and kindergarten teachers. 84% of teachers at these grade levels are female, an overwhelming percentage. As we move to the secondary level, the percentage of female teachers lowers to 59%. As the level of education increases, so do the number of male educators. Shifting our focus to the principal statistics, you will see a similar trend. Women are better represented at the elementary level than high school. The numbers for female elementary school leaders is promising. However, when you consider that 84% of teachers at this level are female, the percentages are still predominantly skewed. What can we do as a profession to increase awareness of gendered stereotypes, of barriers that affect women's promotions, and of the continued underrepresentation of women in positions of power?
Through our research, professional development opportunities, such as mentoring and networking, were reoccurring suggestions for potential leadership candidates. Sperendio stated that researchers have advocated that women aspiring to top-level leadership roles in education should seek out mentors who can testify to their leadership capacities. A mentorship program can motivate one to achieve a career goal, and it allows one access into existing networks. According to Allen, Day, and Lentz, as cited in Ellis and Keister, same-gendered mentorships lead to high satisfaction and more interpersonal comfort than different-gendered mentorships. Other benefits of a mentoring program, as detailed in Ellis and Keister's study, include a boost of confidence in one's ability to lead and to push one outside of one's comfort zone. Ryan, Patra, and Bednar argued that the categories of feminine girls and masculine boys are perpetuated and encouraged by adults. Boys are socialized to lead. Girls do not always receive the same message, and this expectation follows our children into their adult lives. As we discussed in the barriers portion of this presentation, there are unfortunately different leadership standards for men and women. Participants in Ellis and Keister's study argued that men are judged on the basis of competence, not likability, whereas women will not be accepted as leaders if they are not liked. Mentorship programs can effectively guide women through the extraordinary obstacles and unfair judgments placed upon them. Climbing the leadership ladder for women is not the same trek as for men. It never has been, and it continues to differ even today. A mentoring program also brings forth an important notion detailed in Reel and Bard's text. If female school leaders are to have a significant impact on schooling, the numbers of women in administration must rise. Professional socialization processes often reward conformity to existing norms, rather than the introduction of fresh values and ideas. A mentoring program has the potential to inject new life into a patriarchal institution. Networking provides professionals with the opportunity to branch out of their inner circle. Sperendio stated that networking is an opportunity to see and learn the strengths from people outside of our little worlds. Both men and women can benefit from these cooperative experiences. It is important to stay abreast to current research and practices and to engage in collegial discussions about school systems, leaders, and common issues, argued Sperendio. Professional development, we believe, can continue to bring light to an important issue in our educational system, the underrepresentation of female leaders. Berkman argued that women in leadership cannot change the way leadership and education has been done in the past, but change can be made in altering the perception of women in leadership positions. The next generation of female leaders will greatly benefit from understanding the journey that it has taken women to attain positions of power. It also highlights how much farther we have to travel to combat the pervasive gendered stereotypes that continue to undermine female educators. Kosar, Altanay, and Uklika stated that not neglecting women in educational administrative positions is of vital importance for the development of society. We all have a role to play in this issue. However, as Sensoy and D'Angelo argue, it is often difficult to see the cultural water when we have been swimming in it our whole lives. Thank you for listening to our presentation.